My husband demanded a divorce, announcing his intention to marry his 9-year-old assistant. His parents clapped their hands in delight. With a firm hand, I signed the divorce papers and packed up everything that was mine from the day I got married. The next morning, when my husband arrived at his factory in Gary, Indiana, the plant manager informed him that it had effectively shut down overnight. I still remember that afternoon with chilling clarity. Around 6:00 p.m., the last rays of sunlight cast a yellow band across the cold tile floor of the balcony. This house in our affluent Chicago suburb, always so irritatingly pristine, suddenly felt hollow, as if it had lost its way. The crystal chandelier in the foyer still sparkled, but as its light fell upon the ebony dining table, it cast an indescribable chill, like the final glance between two people when love has died. The moment I set the pot roast on the table and began to untie my apron, the front door opened, the jingle of keys, the scrape of dress shoes on the floor, and the heavy thud of a briefcase tossed onto the sofa. My husband, Michael Davis, collapsed onto the couch. He didn't look at the dinner table, and he didn't look at me. He uttered a single blade-sharp sentence. "Let's get a divorce." As the words fell into the living room, the air froze. I could hear the ticking of the clock on the mantelpiece and the sound of my own heart, which seemed to stumble down a flight of stairs and land with a thud. I stood motionless, not because I wasn't in pain, but because I suddenly understood that sometimes a pain too great can paralyze you, leaving you without even the strength to scream. Why? 5 years ago, on our wedding day, Michael had held my hand and said, "All I need is you," when he was starting his factory and short on capital. He held my hand and said, "We've got this. Grace. We'll be fine." And I believed him. I believed him enough to pour everything I had into helping him succeed, from the trust fund my parents left me to the money I'd saved before we were married. And now, he spoke of divorce as casually as changing a light bulb. Before I could even catch my breath, my mother-in-law, Carol, slammed her teacup onto its saucer. There was no trace of surprise on her face. Instead, she approached me, her voice sickeningly sweet. "Michael, have you thought this through? Well, if there's someone better for you, your father and I won't stand in your way." I turned to look at her. Her casual dismissal, "won't stand in your way," was light as a feather, but it sounded like the final word on my role in this house. She looked at me with undisguised contempt. "It's been 5 years and not a single child. This house is so empty for a woman. You do nothing but potter around in that kitchen." I clenched the edge of my apron. I wanted to scream. It's not that I don't want children. I wanted to tell them about the gut-wrenching pain with every hospital visit, every medication, every injection, every test. But I didn't. I knew that to them, a woman who couldn't produce an heir was just making excuses no matter how much she sacrificed. My father-in-law, Robert, sitting in his armchair, took a sip of tea and spoke slowly, as if delivering a verdict. "When a man's business is doing well, he needs someone young and sharp by his side. What's that assistant's name? Jessica. Just 19. Isn't she? A real go-getter. 19. The word sent a shiver down my spine. I had met her a few times. She was always armed with syrupy compliments, small gifts for my mother-in-law, and a calculating look in her eyes. At the time, I thought she was just ambitious. I never imagined her ambition would one day be the reason I was pushed out of my own home. Michael finally lifted his head. His eyes shone with a manic excitement I hadn't seen in years. "Jessica is smart and beautiful. She's not like someone who's cooped up in the kitchen all day, completely out of touch with the real world." He paused, looking directly at me. I heard every single word. Each one felt like a sharpened blade, piercing my flesh without drawing blood. I walked to the table, picked up a piece of pot roast, and put it in my mouth. The savory flavor, Michael's favorite, tasted like ash. I struggled to swallow, not because of the food, but because I was choking on the realization that a man's heart could change as quickly as he could change his words to his wife. Carol continued excitedly. "Oh, she's a darling. The last time she was here, she kept calling me Mrs. Davis." And it was so lovely to hear. And she brought me that wonderfully scented hand cream. You haven't bought me so much as a pair of socks in 5 years. I laughed silently to myself. The nutritional supplements, the blood pressure monitor, the countless trips to the doctor. All the things I had done for 5 years were worth less than a tube of hand cream from a 19-year-old. Because that hand cream came with a healthy dose of flattery that boosted her ego. Michael pulled out his phone and showed a picture to his parents as if displaying a trophy. This is Jessica. So much younger and prettier. Right? The woman in the photo wore heavy makeup and a revealing dress. Her eyes holding the look of someone who had learned to calculate her odds early in life. Carol leaned in. A wide smile erasing her deep-set wrinkles. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. My son has a good eye. Michael. This is the kind of woman who suits you. I stood in the middle of the house I once thought was my sanctuary and listened as they discussed replacing me like an old piece of furniture. Once they decided to throw me away, every reason became justifiable. She's childless. She's not young. She has no style. By slapping these labels on me, they could evict me without a shred of guilt. Michael pulled a stack of papers from his briefcase and tossed them on the coffee table. Divorce agreement. Don't expect a big settlement. This house is mine and the factory I built is mine. He sneered. Just pack your bags and get out. I looked down at the papers. The black ink was stark and clear. I was to leave with nothing. Everything was to be the property of Michael Davis. The absurdity of it made me let out a dry, bitter laugh. The initial capital for his factory had come from my parents' trust fund. The machinery was purchased with my money. The lease for the factory land was in my name. Even this house was a property I had paid for in full before our wedding. I had only added his name to the deed out of trust. But I didn't argue then and there. I knew that in a fight like this, the winner isn't the one who speaks the most, but the one who remains the coldest. I picked up the papers and scanned them. When I didn't cry, scream, or beg. Michael frowned. What? You want more? You should be grateful I'm letting you walk away quietly. Carol chimed in, her voice dripping with venom. Michael is only being this generous because he remembers the time you spent as husband and wife. Robert nodded as if finalizing the matter. Just sign it. Don't waste Michael's and Jessica's time. I put the papers down, took off my apron, folded it neatly, and placed it on the arm of the sofa. My actions were so calm they surprised even me. In my mind, a flood of numbers, contracts, receipts, and wire transfer confirmations, all of which I had meticulously saved, rose to the surface. If they were going to be merciless, then I had no reason to show weakness. I lifted my head and looked at Michael. My voice, when it came, was steady, calm, and cold. Fine. Give me 3 days. Michael scoffed. 3 days? What for? Don't try to pull anything. I looked him straight in the eye. For the first time in a long time, I couldn't find a trace of the man I had once loved. In 3 days, I'll give you my answer with everything that belongs to me. Finished. I turned my back on them so they wouldn't see me exhale, and walked into the bedroom. As the door clicked shut, I leaned against it, my heart finally constricting as if caught in a vice. But alongside the pain, something else was rising. A sharp, icy calm. I knew this evening wasn't the end. It was merely the drumbeat signaling the beginning. For the next 3 days, I would not cry. I would reclaim everything I had poured into this marriage with evidence, with the law, and with a composure they never imagined their kitchen maid of a wife could ever possess. I didn't sleep that night. As the door closed behind me, the sound of their laughter from the living room pierced me like needles. I sat on the edge of the bed, watching the street light filter through the curtains, creating long stripes on the floor. The emptiness in my heart was so profound. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. But the pain was no longer a weight pulling me down. It had transformed into a secret burning ember. The colder I became, the clearer my mind grew. I had only 2 choices: walk out onto the street with nothing, or stand up and take back what was mine. This wasn't about revenge. It was about survival. About living as a human being with dignity. I opened the closet and pulled out a black document box from the deepest drawer. On my wedding day, my mother had warned me, Grace, documents are like the bones of your life. No matter how much you love someone, always leave yourself a way out. I had laughed then, thinking she was being overly cautious. Now I understood. My mother wasn't cautious. She knew life. I laid the documents out on the desk one by one. The deed and sales contract for the house clearly stating I had paid in full before the marriage. The wire transfer confirmations for the money my parents' trust provided as seed capital. The purchase receipts for the factory machinery. The lease agreement for the factory land and the title for my car also bought before the marriage. They were just lifeless pieces of paper, but at that moment they felt like an invisible hand pulling me back from the edge of a cliff. I poured a glass of water to steady my trembling hands. I wasn't shaking from fear, but from the memories of the past 5 years. For 5 years, I had lived like a shadow in my own home. I quit my office job to support Michael's business, dedicating myself to cooking, cleaning, and managing our home so he could focus on his work. When he was short on funds, I scrimped and saved every penny. When the factory received its first major order, I cried tears of joy. When he needed an emergency loan, I was the one who went around swallowing my pride and enduring my in-laws' condescending remarks about a woman meddling in business. And now, they said the factory was his creation alone, and I was just a freeloader. I let out a soft laugh in the dark room. It wasn't a laugh of joy. It was the laugh of someone who finally saw the truth with perfect clarity. That credit often goes only to the person standing in the spotlight, while the one pulling the ropes, changing the lights, and paying the electric bill is treated as if they don't exist. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. I didn't prepare breakfast, clean the house, or ask Michael if he'd be home late. I dressed smartly, tied my hair in a high ponytail, gathered my documents, and left the room. In the living room, my mother-in-law watched me like a hawk, as if I might steal the silverware on my way out. "Where are you going?" she asked with a pointed cough. "To work," I replied nonchalantly. She twisted her lips. "What work do you have to do? Just stay home and behave. Don't do anything foolish." I didn't bother to argue. The old me would have been hurt, would have tried desperately to prove my worth. But I no longer felt the need to prove anything to people who had already decided I was worthless. I walked straight to the front door and closed it quietly behind me, as if closing a chapter of my life. I had an appointment with a lawyer in a small office near downtown Chicago. Mr. Chen was a sharp man with a calm demeanor and piercing eyes. As soon as I placed my documents on his desk, he began to flip through them with the precision of a doctor checking a patient's pulse. "What is your desired outcome for this divorce?" he asked. I looked him straight in the eye. "I want to reclaim all of my premarital assets and the funds I contributed. I will not contest any of the marital profits. I just want what's mine. And I want this to be over." Mr. Chen nodded, his voice confident. "The evidence is exceptionally strong. But you must be prepared. They will call you greedy, vindictive, a betrayer." I answered, each word like a nail being hammered into place. "They betrayed me first. I am only saving myself." Mr. Chen thought for a moment, then began marking items with his pen. "The house was purchased and paid for before the marriage, which makes it your separate property. The fact that you added his name to the deed does not legally constitute a gift of equity without a separate written agreement. The seed money from your parents' trust with its clear wire transfers and documentation is also considered your separate property. The machinery with valid receipts and contracts predating the marriage is also yours." As I listened, I felt a sense of resolve hardening within me. Fairness did exist in the world. It wasn't found in the words of family, but in the cold, hard text of legal documents. "Do you want to proceed quickly or draw it out?" Mr. Chen asked. I didn't hesitate. "It has to be fast. They feel secure right now. The longer this drags on, the greater the risk they'll try to hide assets." Mr. Chen handed me his business card. "Go home and draft a new settlement agreement reflecting your terms. I'll review it. When you present it, maintain your composure and say as little as possible. Your calmness will be the weapon they fear most." I took the card, feeling an odd sense of peace. Not because everything was solved, but because I was finally on my own side. I returned home that afternoon. Michael was sprawled on the living room sofa, his feet on the table, scrolling through his phone. He glanced up as I entered. "You said 3 days. But you're back in 1. Made up your mind? Good. Just sign the papers." I looked at him and said in a calm voice, "Just wait." I said, 3 days and it will be exactly 3 days. He sneered. "You really think you can change anything?" I didn't argue. I went to my room, closed the door, and following my lawyer's advice, continued to organize my documents. I photographed every receipt, had copies notarized, and printed out text messages confirming fund transfers. My hands ADHD from the work, but my mind had never been clearer. I realized something then. When a woman decides she will no longer be cornered, she can become a force more formidable than she ever knew. That evening, I could hear my mother-in-law's excited voice on the phone in the living room. "Yes, that Jessica girl is just a doll. I always said a daughter-in-law should be young." Inside my room, I looked at the pile of documents on my desk. Outside, they were dreaming of a new daughter-in-law. And inside, I was building my escape. Before we move to the second day of this counterattack, I want to say a sincere word to everyone listening to this story. Please support me by liking and subscribing. I wish health and peace to all of you. That night, I signed the new settlement agreement prepared by my lawyer. I was no longer the wife who waited for her husband in the kitchen. I was the person who would sit across from them, lay the truth on the table, and watch them choke on their own injustice. On the morning of the second day, I left my room at precisely 10:00 a.m. Not early, not late, as if measuring time with a cold ruler. The house was the same, but everything felt different. The sofa where Michael had pronounced our divorce, the table where they had tossed the papers like trash. My mother-in-law's precious tea said it all felt like a stage set up to ridicule me. I pushed open the door to Michael's home office. Robert and Carol were already seated as if they had come to witness my surrender. Michael leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers on the table, annoyed that his call with Jessica had been interrupted. Finally decided to sign. "Have you?" he said with a contemptuous tone. "I'm busy. Jessica and I are going ring shopping." I didn't reply. I pulled out the chair opposite him, sat down, placed my black briefcase on the table, and slowly unlatched it. The small click echoed like a starting gun. All 3 of them looked at me, a mixture of curiosity and disdain in their eyes. The look you give someone about to do something utterly pointless. I took out a stack of papers and placed it squarely in front of Michael. "This is my divorce settlement agreement." Michael paused for a moment, then laughed. "What gives you the right to make demands?" I maintained a calm businesslike tone. "If you want a divorce, you will follow these terms." Robert frowned. Carol leaned forward to get a better look. And Michael snatched the papers and began to flip through them. After only a few pages, his face darkened like a stormy sky. His lips pressed into a thin line and a muscle in his jaw twitched. "Return of all premarital assets. Return of all contributed funds. Return of the factory machinery. Are you insane?" He slammed the papers on the table. "My name is on the deed to this house. The factory is in my name. On what grounds are you demanding everything?" I didn't flinch. I opened another file and spread the documents out on the table like a hand of cards. I pointed to a copy of the deed. "I bought and paid for this house in full before our marriage, and it was solely in my name. I added your name out of trust, but there was no agreement to transfer equity. Legally, this is still my separate property." Carol shot up from her chair, her voice shrill. "Nonsense. If his name is on it, it's marital property. What kind of trick are you trying to pull?" I looked at her, my eyes devoid of fear. "You may not trust me, Mrs. Davis, but the law trusts documents." I placed a copy of a wire transfer confirmation on the table. "This is the $2.2 million from my parents' trust transferred to my personal account before the marriage explicitly for my use of that. I transferred $1.5 million to you, Michael, as seed money for the factory. I have the bank records and a confirmation letter from the trust." Michael opened his mouth to object. But I gave him no chance. I continued laying out purchase receipts, sales contracts, and delivery confirmations for the machinery. 3 CNC machines and 2 sets of inspection equipment. I purchased them before the marriage with my own funds. Here are the receipts and contracts. You said you built the factory on your own. Michael, then please explain where the capital and the machinery came from. Robert's face turned red as he slammed his hand on the table. You're talking absolute nonsense. While Michael was working his fingers to the bone, you were sitting at home doing nothing. And now you claim everything is yours. I gave a cold laugh. Doing nothing. I managed the household, the meals, and our entire social life so that Michael could work without a single worry. I poured my inheritance into the factory and used my own name and credit to secure loans for it. If that's doing nothing, then please, by all means, you and Carol should try doing nothing for a day. Carol stood behind Michael, sputtering. If you take everything, how is our Michael supposed to live? What about the factory? I looked her straight in the eye. That is no longer my problem. A silence fell over the room, broken only by the hum of the air conditioner. Michael stared at the papers, flipping to the last page. It stipulated that I would take the house, the car, the machinery, my contributed funds, and all premarital property, but I would not claim a single penny of the business profits earned during the marriage. Michael gritted his teeth. You think I'm scared of you suing me? I took a business card from my briefcase, placed it in front of him, and slid it gently across the table. That's my lawyer. We have more than enough evidence. Sue if you want. But let me be clear. I am not fighting over marital property. I am reclaiming my separate property. The longer you drag this out, the more you'll pay in legal fees, and the more your personal use of company funds will come to light. Michael's eyes widened. Are you threatening me? My voice was calm, but each word was like ice. No. I'm advising you to think carefully. That phrase, think carefully, struck a nerve. I saw exactly what he was afraid of. Not losing me, but losing the facade of the successful entrepreneur he wore to impress a 1-year-old girl. Carol tugged at Michael's arm and whispered, though I heard it clearly, just sign it, honey. It's just stuff. After you marry Jessica, she's young and ambitious. She'll help you earn it all back 10 times over. Robert chimed in as if to reassure himself. That's right. Sometimes you have to lose something to gain something better. Don't fight with a woman. Michael hesitated. I sat in silence. I knew that the more I stayed quiet, the deeper they would dig their own hole. Finally, Michael let out a sigh and picked up a pen. Fine. You win. He scribbled his signature hastily, the pen digging into the paper as if trying to end the ordeal as quickly as possible. Carol looked at me with a triumphant smirk. There. Are you happy now? Take it and get out. And don't even think about coming back for more. I took the signed agreement and checked each page, verifying the signature and thumbprint. I didn't rush. I had learned that in a messy separation, a person's demise often comes from a moment of carelessness. After confirming everything was valid, I placed the document in my briefcase and latched it. There's one more thing, I said. Michael frowned. What now? I looked him in the eye, my voice still calm. The lease for the factory land is in my name and it expires in 3 months. I have already notified the landlord that I will not be renewing it. Robert shot to his feet. How dare you? I continued, not letting him interrupt. Furthermore, the approximately $300,000 worth of raw materials were purchased with my money. I will be sending a team to conduct an inventory and retrieve them. Michael jumped up, his face pale. You are truly vicious. Those materials are needed for next month's production run. I stood up and faced him, feeling strangely light. From the moment you signed that paper, we are no longer husband and wife. I am taking what is mine. If you want to continue production, you'll have to figure it out yourself. The air in the room was suffocating. I turned my back on the curses, the sound of a fist hitting the table, and the palpable shock they were trying so desperately to hide, and walked toward the door. As I stepped into the hallway, I realized my hands were cold, but my heart was no longer trembling. I wasn't happy. I just saw with perfect clarity that some people only realize the value of something after it's gone from their hands. I walked away from Michael's office without a second glance. As the door closed behind me, Robert's shouts, Carol's curses, and the sound of Michael slamming the table blended into a muddy, indistinct noise. But strangely, I wasn't afraid. For the first time in 5 years, I felt a sense of control, the feeling of making my own decisions, and it began to fill the emptiness inside me. I went back to my room, but I didn't pack my clothes as they expected, nor did I collapse in tears as they hoped. I called Mr. Chen. Please prepare the inventory and logistics teams as planned. Mr. Chen's voice was calm. Don't worry. The personnel and vehicles will arrive on time. Just confirm the asset list and we will handle all procedures by the book. I hung up and stood before the mirror for a moment. My eyes were slightly bloodshot from lack of sleep, but my gaze was clearer than ever. I made a promise to myself. Do not let emotion interfere with rational judgment. Emotion makes you a step slower. And in a messy divorce, being a step slow can cost you your entire life. Around 8:00 p.m., I walked out with my briefcase. Carol, sitting in the living room, jumped up to block my path. Where are you going? You signed the papers. What are you plotting now? I gave her a brief glance. I'm going to collect my things. She snorted. Your things? Everything in this house belongs to this house. I didn't argue. I opened the door and stepped outside. The Chicago night air was cool and the trees rustled softly. I took a deep breath like someone who had been trapped in a cage of ridicule and was finally breathing free air. Mr. Chen's car was already waiting downstairs. He didn't ask if I was okay. He knew such questions can sometimes make a person weaker. He simply opened the door and said curtly, "Let's go." We headed to a condominium I owned in Lincoln Park, located in a quiet residential area. I had bought it before my marriage as a long-term investment, but had moved into the suburban house to build a home with Michael, leaving the condo mostly for storage. Tonight, it would be my base of operations. I didn't want my property in someone else's hands for a second longer than necessary. When we arrived at the entrance to the underground parking garage, 3 moving trucks were already lined up, their red tail lights glowing. A team of 6 movers in uniform stood by along with an inventory manager holding a tablet and an asset appraiser. The moving supervisor approached and handed me a checklist. We've brought all the necessary protective gear, packing materials, and shockproof crates. Please confirm. I scanned the list and nodded. Begin. Start with the items in the storage unit. Please be careful not to scratch anything. He turned and shouted an order, and the team moved like a well-oiled machine. I went down into the garage. My black Mercedes, which I had bought before the marriage, was still gleaming under the yellow lights. Next to it were boxes of belongings I had brought with me when I moved in with Michael. Suitcases, storage bins, my professional camera equipment, a high-end audio system, and a few pieces of furniture I cherished. For the past 5 years, Michael had used that car as if it were his own, without ever once acknowledging it was mine, just as he had used my sacrifices like free fuel. I handed the keys to a driver from my lawyer's team. This car is in my name, and I have the title. Please move it to the visitor parking across the way. The driver nodded and moved quickly. The engine roared to life, the sound echoing through the garage like a declaration that I was putting what was mine back in its rightful place. Just then, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed from the ramp. I turned to see Michael and his parents, their faces furious as if they'd been slapped in public. They must have gone upstairs, found my room empty, and rushed over, assuming I was up to something. Carol folded her arms and sneered. Well, look at this. The divorce isn't even final, and you've already called the movers. Who do you think you are? Some kind of queen? Michael leaned against a pillar, his hands in his pockets. His posture was arrogant, but his eyes darted back and forth, following the items being wrapped in protective foam. I thought you were taking something important. Just a few boxes and some old cameras. Take it all. Good riddance. Robert circled the movers with a disdainful look. Women are all the same, making a big fuss over trivial things. I stood in the center of the garage and watched them. I realized they were feigning contempt to hide a vague sense of unease. The things I was taking might be trivial to them, but they were the first tangible sign that I was no longer under their control. The inventory manager approached me. Should I get their signatures to confirm each item? He asked quietly. I nodded. Yes. Record the condition and quantity of every item. Note who the witnesses were and have them sign. Hearing this, Carol rushed forward. What signature are you trying to frame us for stealing from our own house? I looked her in the eye. I just want to make sure I'm not accused of stealing anything later. She fell silent. Michael twisted his lips. Fine. I'll sign. You have way too much time on your hands. I signaled for the team to continue. They loaded the camera, the audio system, and the boxes onto the truck. The appraiser photographed the current condition of each valuable item. The inventory manager entered the data and handed over the tablet for a signature. Carol signed with an annoyed scowl. Robert scribbled his name as if throwing it away. And Michael signed carelessly. I didn't care about their mood. I only cared that the signature existed. When the movers brought out a red jewelry box, Carol lunged for it, snatching it away. This is what Michael gave you. You can't take jewelry from during the marriage. I calmly signaled the inventory manager to open a file on his tablet. From my briefcase, I produced a small folder of receipts for jewelry I had purchased before the marriage. I bought this myself before we were married. The date, amount, and store are all recorded. I threw away the gifts Michael gave me. Carol glanced at the receipts, her face paling as if doused with cold water. She stepped back. Michael frowned. For the first time that night, a small crack appeared in his confident facade. I said nothing more, only glancing at my watch. Everything was proceeding according to plan. As the doors of the first truck closed, the supervisor ran over. First truck is full. Should we send it off? I nodded. Send it. Follow the designated route. The truck slowly pulled out of the garage, its red tail lights disappearing around a corner. Carol stood there stunned, watching it go, as if losing something she thought she would possess forever. I knew this was just the beginning. The things that would truly hurt them were yet to come. The factory machinery and the cash flow. I turned to Michael. My voice was soft but sharp. Tomorrow I'm sending people to the factory to inventory the machines and inspection equipment. Have someone there to verify the list. Michael scoffed. Do whatever you want. I'll just buy new ones. I didn't argue. I knew his confidence was just an inflatable tube. And when it finally deflated, he would drown. That night, when the third truck was loaded and its doors closed, I looked at the empty space in the garage and felt as if I could hear the wind blowing through it. The objects, memories, and quiet efforts that had once been connected to me were all loaded onto 3 trucks heading for my storage condo. I didn't feel sad. I felt light, as if I had finally taken off a heavy sandbag I had been carrying on my shoulders for 5 years. Michael was still leaning against the wall, his eyes fixed on his phone, fingers flying across the screen. I knew he was texting Jessica, probably bragging that it was all over, that his ex-wife had only taken a few trivial things. Carol and Robert had moved from sharp insults to muttering reassurances to themselves. Their faces had hardened at the sight of the empty space, but they tried to maintain a brave front. Good riddance, Carol yelled at the disappearing truck. I looked at her and said in a calm voice, I may be leaving, but this isn't over. Robert's eyes widened. What more do you want? Don't be so greedy. I didn't answer. I turned to the inventory manager. Finalize the paperwork. Once all signatures are collected, send a copy to my lawyer. The manager nodded. I got into Mr. Chen's car. As we pulled away from the residential complex, I saw them in the rearview mirror. 3 dark figures standing under the yellow lights looking abandoned. A thought crossed my mind. Their arrogance was only valid until they started to lose things. In the car, Mr. Chen asked curtly, how will you proceed with the next step tomorrow? I looked straight ahead at the city lights flowing like a river. The factory. Mr. Chen nodded, asking no more questions. He understood that this was no longer about anger or revenge for me. It was about meticulously severing every tie to ensure I would never be dragged back in. The next morning, I woke up very early. The sky over Chicago was clear with a rare crisp coolness in the air. I dressed in a white shirt and a black blazer, my hair tied back neatly. I didn't want to look like a woman who had been abandoned. I wanted to look like a person coming to reclaim what was fair. I called Frank, the former plant manager at the factory. He had worked with my father for years. Because my father had trusted him, I had suggested Michael put Frank in charge of operations when I provided the initial capital. I hadn't been deeply involved, but I knew Frank was a man of principle. Frank, please have a team ready to cooperate with my inventory personnel at 9:00 a.m. this morning. The machines, the inspection equipment, and the raw materials I mentioned, everything needs to be clearly accounted for. Frank's voice was calm and firm. Yes. Don't worry. I've already sealed the warehouse and the lists are waiting for you. I hung up. My heart wasn't pounding. The only faint tremor I felt was a bitter acknowledgement that the person on my side was not the man I had called my husband, but an outsider who respected my father. Around lunchtime, I received a text from Michael. Don't push it too far. I'm busy tonight. Just one line. I read it and immediately deleted it. I understood that busy tonight meant picking out rings with Jessica, having dinner at a fine restaurant, and living the new life he believed he deserved. He either didn't see the tide rising at his feet or chose to ignore it. That afternoon, I made one last trip to the house to pick up my remaining personal documents, my social security card, birth certificate, and a few old passport photos. As soon as I walked in, Carol rushed over like a guard dog. What are you doing here again? I didn't look at her. I'm here for my papers. She gasped. You're taking your documents, too? I stopped and turned. My voice was soft, but sharp as a razor's edge. These documents are issued by the government. This house has no right to keep them. Robert emerged from the living room, his face red. You think you can do whatever you want just because you have a lawyer? Michael is going to sue you. I gave him a slight glance. Tell Michael to sue me. I'll be waiting. At that, Robert was speechless. People often raise their voices when they lose the grip they thought they had. I went straight to the room, packed what I needed into a bag, and on my way out, found Michael standing by the door. Having just returned, he smelled of an unfamiliar perfume. He looked at me with disgust as if I were something dirty. What are you still doing here? You signed the agreement. Let's just go our separate ways. I nodded. You're right. We should go our separate ways. He must have thought I was surrendering because he twisted his lips into a smirk, then stopped interfering. You took all the machines. How am I supposed to run the factory? Do you want to see me fail? I looked him straight in the eye. The memory of that dinner, of his eyes gleaming as he showed off Jessica's photo of his ice-cold words demanding a divorce, flashed through my mind. I understood that the man in front of me was no longer the man I loved, but someone terrified of losing the platform he had stood on to look down on me. I spoke slowly, each word dropping like a stone to the floor. You're not failing because I took the machines, Michael. You're failing because you mistakenly thought everything was yours. Michael's face changed color. I didn't let him finish. I walked to the door, paused at the threshold, and took one last look at my ex-husband and his parents. My people will be at the factory tomorrow. I don't want any trouble. If you cooperate, this will end quietly. Carol rushed forward. Stop harassing my son. I gave a silent laugh. Harassing him? Did you think I wouldn't be in pain when you two threw me out of this house? With that, I opened the door and walked out. The evening breeze carried the scent of lilacs from somewhere nearby. I didn't look back. In the car, I sat up straight, watching the crowds fill the streets of Chicago. A woman's life could be gentle. It could be yielding. But that didn't mean she had to consent to being devoured. I knew that tomorrow would be the climax. The factory would be the flashpoint. And after that explosion, Michael would finally understand what it meant to lose. To everyone listening to this story, I ask you once more, please support me with a like and a subscription. I wish for the health and peace of everyone hearing this. That morning, I arrived at the factory much earlier than usual. The industrial park in Gary was still shrouded in a light fog. The roads were quiet with only a few trucks parked here and there. The sign, Davis Precision Manufacturing, was still brightly lit. But to me it looked like a borrowed name borrowed from my inheritance, from my trust, and from the countless nights I had spent calculating cash flow so Michael wouldn't have to struggle. Frank was already waiting at the main gate. The man, in his mid-40s, had dark circles under his eyes from a sleepless night. But his voice was firm. "You're here." I nodded. "Open the warehouses and the factory floor. Has my inventory team arrived?" Frank pointed behind him. "They're on their way. I've also called the department heads. Everything will be done by the book with signature confirmations for every step." I went into the small office inside the factory and placed my briefcase on the desk. Mr. Chen and his two associates, the inventory manager and the asset appraiser, arrived shortly after. They gave me a brief nod and immediately opened their laptops, pulling up the checklists. I looked around the factory floor. It still smelled of oil, steel, and metal dust. It was the smell of years of investment, not of my own sweat, but of my money and my faith. 10 minutes before 9, Michael showed up. He got out of his car with an annoyed expression, but tried to maintain the composure of a boss. A young man stood beside him, probably a new assistant Jessica had recommended. When Michael saw me, he sneered, making a big scene. "Are we afraid I'll swallow this factory whole?" I didn't answer immediately. I looked him straight in the eye and then said slowly, "I am only recovering my property. You are here to observe and provide a confirmation signature, so you can't claim I stole anything later." Michael scoffed. "You really think the law is on your side?" Mr. Chen stepped forward, his voice still polite but firm. "Mr. Davis, we are proceeding according to the settlement agreement you signed. If you cooperate, this will be over quietly. If you obstruct, this will become a contentious legal dispute. I suggest you consider who stands to lose more in that scenario." Michael glared at the lawyer, a flicker of anger in his eyes, but he quickly swallowed it and turned away. "Fine. Do whatever you want." I gave the signal to begin. The inventory team went straight to the CNC machine area. The 3 machines, the pillars of the factory, stood there large, heavy, expensive, and most importantly, not replaceable overnight. The asset appraiser opened the control panels, confirmed the specifications, photographed the serial numbers, and recorded videos of their operational state. The inventory manager recorded each item, machine name, serial number, purchase year, and condition. Michael stood with his arms crossed, his face a hard mask, acting like it's a crime scene investigation over a few machines. I looked at him, my voice still calm. "Because this is evidence. I don't want to be told later that the machines broke because you moved them improperly." Robert and Carol arrived soon after, probably summoned by Michael. Carol started shouting the moment she walked in, her shrill voice echoing through the factory. "You are a truly toxic woman. If you take all the machines, what happens to the factory? How is my son supposed to make a living?" I looked at her and instead of arguing, I said just one thing. "You said all I knew was the kitchen, Mrs. Davis. So, let's see how well Michael's factory runs without me." She was speechless, grabbing Robert's arm as if seeking an ally. Robert's face was flushed, but this time, he couldn't slam a table as he had at home. There were employees, outsiders, and a lawyer present. He was afraid of losing face. And the more a person fears losing face, the more easily they are defeated. When we reached the inspection equipment area, the technician opened a cabinet and took out 2 sets of precision gauges. Frank stood beside me and said in a low, clear voice, "Without these, the factory can't ship any products. Without the inspection certificates, clients will reject the shipment immediately." I nodded, knowing this better than anyone. I glanced at Michael. He was still trying to act indifferent, but his eyes were wavering. He knew it, too. Losing the CNC machines meant losing production capacity. Losing the inspection equipment meant losing the ability to deliver. The factory would grind to a halt, leaving nothing but an empty shell. The inventory manager handed over the signature tablet. Mr. Davis, please sign to confirm that these items are on the list of Miss Miller's separate property and to verify their current condition. Michael grabbed the pen and signed quickly, as if wanting to get it over with. I didn't stop him. I just watched. In a life that's falling apart, many people sign things carelessly and pay the price for the rest of their lives. Around noon, a professional logistics team arrived. They brought forklifts, securing straps, and shock-absorbent wooden crates. The technician requested that the power be cut according to regulations, and that fragile components be detached. Everything was done swiftly but precisely, like a surgical operation. I stood there and felt no triumph, only the cold truth that what I once thought was ours had been built on a foundation of mine from the very beginning. Michael finally lost his composure. He approached me, his voice rough. Honestly, do you have to go this far? Do you want to see me ruined? I looked at him. There was no resentment left in my eyes, only clarity. I just wanted you to understand the consequences of disrespecting someone. You demanded a divorce for a 19-year-old girl. You called me outdated and useless. So, prove it. Prove you can succeed without me. Michael was silent. Carol tried to rush forward again, but the logistics team members blocked her path. Mr. Chen leaned toward me and said quietly, "The next step." I nodded. I took out my phone and using a direct line the lawyer had prepared called the bank. "Hello. I am calling on behalf of my client Grace Miller. As per the documents submitted, please initiate the transaction restriction procedures." Mr. Chen added legal information, read out document numbers, and confirmed the details. I heard the representative on the other end say the request has been received and will take effect as soon as possible. The moment Michael heard the words transaction restriction, he whipped around. "What are you doing now?" I didn't back down. "I am freezing the cash flow that is commingled with my separate property. I haven't touched any legitimate marital assets, but I have to protect what's mine." Michael sneered. "You think you can stop me just like that?" I looked him straight in the eye. "You'll find out when you try to make a withdrawal at the bank." Just then, Frank came running from the warehouse, handing me the raw materials inventory list. His voice was urgent. The steel and raw materials worth about $400,000 match the list you provided. The warehouse is sealed. Just give the order. I took the document, signed my confirmation, and said clearly, "Send the trucks to move it tonight. Be quick, be precise, follow procedure, and get all the necessary paperwork and signatures." Michael stood frozen like a statue. Robert's face was pale, and Carol opened her mouth to curse, but only let out a ragged breath. I looked at them. For the first time, I saw something akin to fear on their faces, not just absolute contempt. And before this story reaches its next climax, I ask you all once more, please support me with a like and a subscription. I wish for the health and peace of everyone hearing this. In the afternoon, as the first CNC machine was lifted off the factory floor, I heard a screeching metallic sound like a pillar being ripped from a building. Michael watched, his eyes bloodshot, but he tried to feign indifference. I knew he didn't fully understand yet. But tomorrow, when the factory fell silent and an error message popped up on his bank account, he would. That night, I did not return to that house. I went back to my condo in Lincoln Park. The 3 trucks from the previous day had already unloaded their cargo. In the large, cold space, shockproof wooden crates were stacked neatly, like pieces of a life being reassembled. I sat on a plastic chair and signed off on the transfer documents for the CNC machines, the inspection equipment, and the raw materials. One by one, my signature was steady, without a tremor. But in my heart, each stroke of the pen felt like severing a final lingering connection. Mr. Chen stood beside me, watched me for a moment, and asked, "Are you certain you want to forfeit your claim to the marital profits?" I looked up. "Yes, I'm sure. I just want what's mine back. I don't want to drag this out any longer." Mr. Chen nodded as if understanding something deeper than my words. Sometimes foregoing what you are entitled to is the only way to save yourself from being trapped in a relationship that has already rotted. Around midnight, I got a call from Frank. The raw materials warehouse is empty. The trucks are on their way to the condo. As you requested, I've also shut off the main power and sealed the machine room. I've posted a production halted notice. I looked out at the long shadows cast by the street lights outside the condo's window. What was the employee's reaction? I asked quietly. Frank sighed. They're confused. A few of the foremen asked if they should come in tomorrow. I told them to wait for an official announcement. If this goes on, the factory will really shut down. I paused for a moment before saying, yes, that's right. Please process it as a temporary layoff. For anyone who needs a confirmation letter for unemployment benefits, please sign it on my behalf. I don't want the employees to suffer because of Michael. Yes. Frank replied. I could tell from his voice that he understood. I didn't want to create more animosity. I just wanted to close a chapter. At 1:00 a.m. The last truck carrying the raw materials arrived. I got up and followed the inventory manager, checking each pallet. Steel coils, metal stock, boxes of components. Everything had a quantity, a lot number, and a signature. As I looked at them, I remembered a time when Michael stood in the middle of the factory, his arm around my shoulders, telling the employees, I am where I am today, thanks to my wife. He had been sincere then, but that sincerity had been buried under his arrogance and temptation. After signing the final document, I picked up my phone and saw a string of missed calls from Michael. Not 1, but 3, then 5, and texts. Are you crazy? You really took everything? Grace, answer your phone. What you're doing is destructive. I looked at the words on the screen and turned off my phone. Not out of fear, but because I knew if I answered, he would try every tactic. A soft voice, a harsh voice, a threatening voice, a pleading voice to pull me back into the role of the long-suffering wife. I would not allow that anymore. The next morning, the sun over Chicago was intense. I woke up early and had a cup of black coffee. It was bitter, but I no longer winced. I felt I was crossing a line, a point where I stopped waiting for someone else's affection and started taking care of myself. Around 9:00 a.m. I got a call from Mr. Chen. The bank just confirmed the transaction restrictions on the accounts linked to the submitted documents are now in effect. If Mr. Davis attempts to withdraw funds from the accounts related to the initial seed capital, the system will generate an error. Thank you, I replied curtly. As soon as I hung up, Frank called again. His voice was more urgent. Michael just arrived at the factory. He was yelling his head off. He called me over, demanding to know where the machines and the employees were. I showed him the production halted notice, and he ripped it to shreds. I closed my eyes for a moment. I could picture it. Michael walking into the factory, seeing the empty space where the 3 CNC machines used to be, the empty inspection equipment cabinets, the raw materials warehouse with nothing but dust on the floor, and hearing the whispers of the few remaining staff. For a man who had always believed he held all the power, that empty space would feel like a slap in the face. I spoke to Frank, my voice still calm. Show him copies of the settlement agreement and the inventory documents. Make it clear that everything was done according to the papers. If he causes a disturbance, request assistance from the industrial park's security or the local police. Yes. Frank replied. I sensed a hint of bitterness in his voice, but I couldn't ask more. Ignorance was self-preservation. Before 10:00 a.m. My phone rang again. It was an unfamiliar number. I answered. Is this Grace Miller? This is from the steel supplier for Davis Precision. We're still owed $320,000, which was supposed to be paid last week. And now we can't get in touch with anyone. Since you're Mr. Davis's wife, could you please pass along a message? I took a deep breath. It was happening as I'd expected. With the cash flow frozen and production halted, the debts were starting to surface like sharks. I didn't evade. I said clearly, Sir, I have finalized a divorce agreement with Mr. Davis and am currently in the process of legal separation. That debt is the responsibility of the factory and the factory's president is Michael Davis. Please contact him directly. There was a moment of silence on the other end. Then the man's voice hardened. So, is the factory still operating? The factory has currently ceased production. I replied. He muttered a curse and hung up. Before I could put my phone down, it rang with another number and then another. People demanding money. People asking why their orders weren't being delivered. People threatening to call the police. After listening for a moment, I turned my phone off again. It wasn't to escape. It was because this was Michael's storm to face. And he would not drag me in to be his shield. At lunchtime, I received a text from Carol filled with capital letters and exclamation points. You've ruined my son's life. You're a vicious woman. Don't expect to live peacefully. I read it and deleted it. I had no desire to engage in a war of words. I just wanted everything to be settled by the truth. In the afternoon, a message came from Mr. Chen. The bank reports that Mr. Davis attempted to withdraw funds, but was denied by the system. They say he is in a state of extreme agitation. I put my phone down and looked out the window. The sunlight hit the trees, sparkling brilliantly. Strangely, I felt no joy at the news of his agitation, only a sense of inevitability. You reap what you sow. Michael had SWN betrayal and contempt. It was his turn to reap emptiness and a loss of control. That evening, I met Mr. Chen at a small cafe in downtown Chicago to sign additional divorce papers to be filed with the county court. Soft music played in the cafe, and people laughed as they came and went. Sitting among them, I felt as if I had come back to life. Not because the pain was gone, but because I was no longer trapped in a house with people who disrespected me. Mr. Chen placed a file in front of me. Tomorrow, you and Mr. Davis will go to the county clerk's office to finalize the process. Be prepared. He may cause a scene. I nodded. I'll be there. I want to end this. Mr. Chen looked at me and said in a calm voice, ending this is not failure. Miss Miller, ending this is saving yourself. I didn't answer. I lifted my coffee cup and took a sip. After the bitterness, there was a fragrant aroma. Like life, you sometimes had to taste the bitterness to appreciate the scent. That morning, I woke up very early. No alarm. No one calling my name. My body just woke itself as if prepared for a momentous occasion. I stood in front of the mirror for a long time. Not to apply elaborate makeup, but to tie my hair back neatly and choose a simple white shirt and dark pants. I wanted to look as ordinary as possible. Just a person finalizing an administrative procedure. Nothing more. Nothing less. Outside, it was rush hour in Chicago. The sound of cars honking, and people's voices mingled in the sunlight. Sitting in my car, watching the flow of traffic, I felt a sense of calm. My 5-year marriage would eventually dissolve into that flow. No one would remember and no one would care. Only I had to walk this path. When I arrived at the county clerk's office, Michael was already there. Jessica was not with him. I was a little surprised. Then I realized in the midst of this chaos, Jessica had probably chosen to take a step back. Michael was leaning against a wall. His shirt was wrinkled, his collar askew, and his face was gaunt. The confident air of a factory boss was gone, as was his usual contemptuous smile. When he saw me enter, he looked up. His eyes were a complex mix of anger, anxiety, and something resembling regret, though it fell short of true remorse. You're early. I nodded and chose a chair in the row opposite him, not sitting close. I didn't want to be late. Michael gave a bitter laugh. You were always like that. Always had to see things through to the end. I didn't respond. The old me might have taken that as a compliment. But now I understood that in his eyes, seeing things through meant disregarding other people's feelings. Robert and Carol arrived shortly after. The moment Carol entered, she found me and glared, her gaze as sharp as a needle. Robert walked more slowly, his face heavy. No one greeted each other. The air was thick with unspoken tension. A clerk called our names. I stood up, straightened my back, and followed. Michael trailed behind, his steps heavy. A small room. An old wooden desk and chairs. A slowly rotating ceiling fan. On the desk was a thick file. The divorce agreement. The asset list. The settlement request. Everything was neat, orderly, and cold. The clerk looked us over and asked in the flat, practiced tone of a civil servant, "Do you both agree to this divorce voluntarily without coercion?" "Yes, I do," I answered immediately. Michael replied a beat later. "Yes." The clerk nodded and turned a page. "Regarding the assets, it states here that both parties have reached a separate agreement and are not requesting the court's intervention for resolution." "That's correct," I said. Michael bit his lip and nodded. Carol tried to interject from outside the doorway. "Excuse me, but that factory," the clerk looked up and said sternly. Please be quiet. This is a procedure between the two parties involved." Carol's face flushed with anger, but she didn't say another word. Watching the scene, I felt more weary than triumphant. Weary of people who always believed they had the right to dictate others' lives. The clerk handed a pen to Michael. "Sign here." Michael took the pen. His hand trembled slightly. He looked at me for the first time. There was no challenge in his eyes. "Grace, do we really have to do this?" I looked straight back at him, my voice even. "From the moment you threw those divorce papers in front of me, this is what I wanted to do." Michael gave a sad smile. "Not even a chance to fix my mistake," I answered, each word distinct. "Chances aren't infinite. Michael, I gave you 5 years." He lowered his head and signed. His signature, usually so confident, was shaky. I signed after him. The moment the ink touched the paper, I felt something heavy in my chest finally drop away. It wasn't painful. It was liberating. The procedure was over faster than I expected. The clerk gave us the date when we would receive the final decree. We walked outside. The sunlight hit the courtyard directly, making me squint. Carol could no longer contain herself and rushed in front of me. "Are you satisfied now? You've taken everything and left my son with nothing." I stood my ground, not backing away. "You're mistaken. I didn't take anything of Michael's. I only took back what was mine." Robert growled. "Don't play with words. Do you think you would be where you are today without Davis Precision?" I looked him in the eye. "And would Davis Precision exist without my money?" Robert was speechless. Carol, her hands shaking, pointed at me. "Just you wait. What man in his right mind would want a divorcer like you? You can have all the money you want, but you'll be lonely for the rest of your life." I smiled. Not a smirk, but a smile of understanding. I'd rather be lonely than be in a marriage without respect. Michael stood to the side, saying nothing. I looked at him one last time. "This is it for us." He couldn't meet my gaze and just nodded. I turned and walked out of the county building. Each step was lighter than the last. I didn't look back. I knew there was nothing left behind me worth looking at. When I reached the parking lot, my phone rang. It was Mr. Chen. "Is it finished?" "Yes, it's finished. The bank just reported that Mr. Davis tried to make another transaction. It failed again." I let out a long sigh. "He'll get used to it eventually." Mr. Chen was silent for a moment, then said, "Prepare yourself. When people lose their money and their business, they can become desperate." I looked at the cars in front of me. I'm not afraid. I just feel sorry for the version of myself who thought he was a different person. In the afternoon, I returned to my storage condo. A technical team reported that they had reinstalled some of the machinery according to a new layout. Seeing the machines waiting to be powered on, I felt a strange sense of seeing myself finally back in my rightful place. I sat at a desk, opened my laptop, and began to write the first line of a new business plan. There was no one to interfere. No one to say, "What does a woman know about this?" There was only me and the path I chose. That night, Michael called, but I didn't answer. Not out of hatred, but because I knew our story had ended that morning at the county clerk's office. I stood on the balcony looking at the city lights. In that glow, I saw one thing clearly. Losing my marriage hadn't killed me. It had only forced me to live up to my own value. The next morning, I did not go to the factory. I did it on purpose. I wanted Michael to face the consequences of everything he had disregarded. I was at a temporary office in a small building in downtown Chicago that Mr. Chen had arranged for me, handling paperwork. The desk was simple with just a small plant and a few files. As I sat there looking at my packed schedule, I felt an odd sense of peace. Before noon, Frank's phone was ringing off the hook. When he called me, his voice was urgent and out of breath. "Miss Miller, Michael is at the factory. What did he say?" I asked, my voice still calm. Frank swallowed hard. He was screaming his head off. The moment he walked in, he was yelling, "Where are the machines? Who told you all to take a break?" Then he walked around the floor, saw how empty it was, and his face went white. I closed my eyes for a moment. I could picture the scene. The wide-open factory doors, sunlight pouring onto the concrete floor, the empty space where the CNC machines used to be, the vacant inspection equipment cabinets, the raw materials warehouse with nothing but dust. For a man who had always believed he was the boss, it must have felt like being stripped of his authority in his own territory. Frank continued, his voice dropping as if he was afraid of being overheard. That's not all. This morning, a bunch of suppliers showed up at the main gate, demanding payment. They are blocking the entrance with their trucks." I opened my eyes and stared at my laptop screen. "How many?" "About 10. Steel, raw materials, industrial paint suppliers. They are saying if they don't get paid, they'll call the police or start taking factory assets to cover the debt." I took a deep breath. It was happening just as I had anticipated. With the cash flow frozen and production halted, the creditors were emerging from the shadows like a school of sharks. And the first person they would bite was the one whose name was on the paperwork. "Michael. Let them talk to Michael," I said curtly. "Don't get into an argument. If they need any legal verification, tell them to call my lawyer." Frank said, "Yes," and hung up. 15 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Michael. I stared at the screen for a moment. I hadn't intended to answer, but then I thought that hearing him out one last time might be the final act needed to close this chapter. I hit the answer button. The moment he heard my voice, Michael's exploded. "Grace, what the hell are you doing? You took the machines, the materials, and you froze the accounts. Do you want me to die?" I didn't answer right away. I let him hear the sound of his own voice. There was no affection, no remorse in his shouting, only the panic of a man who had lost power. I spoke slowly, enunciating each word. "I already told you. I'm taking back my property." Michael growled. "My property for 5 years you lived off my factory, and now you're trying to cut off my livelihood?" I gave a silent laugh. "Lived off you? Have you forgotten who put up the money for the factory in the first place?" Michael was momentarily speechless. Then his tone softened slightly like someone who after pounding on a door realizes someone is inside and starts to plead. "Grace, calm down. We can renegotiate. I'll give you whatever you want. Just don't do this." My voice was still cold as I replied, "Did you offer to renegotiate when you threw those divorce papers in my face?" Michael went silent. I could hear his ragged breathing. I was just angry. "I didn't think it would come to this." "The only thing you didn't think of," I said, "was that I would do anything other than cry and beg. But I don't do that anymore." I could hear noise in the background. People talking loudly. Another man yelling, "Pay your bills." I guessed Michael was at the factory gate, surrounded by suppliers. He lowered his voice, almost pleading, "Just help me this one time. At least let me pay these people. Unfreeze the account just for a little while. After I pay them, we can talk again." I was silent for a moment, not because I was wavering, but because the essence of the situation was so clear. He wasn't calling because he missed me. He was calling because he needed someone to save him from a humiliating situation. I spoke, my voice firm. "Michael, I no longer have any obligations to you." He suddenly flew into a rage, his voice vicious. "You're so cruel. How can a woman be so heartless?" I closed my eyes, then opened them. "Cruel was when you betrayed me and then came back to tell me to leave with nothing. I'm just taking back what's mine. Don't call that heartless. Michael sneered as if trying to hold on to his last shred of pride. You think this is over just because you took the machines? I'll just buy new ones and start over. Go ahead, I said flatly and hung up. Immediately after, a call came from Mr. Chen. Miss Miller, the bank has reported that a $500,000 business loan under Mr. Davis's name has defaulted due to non-payment. They are preparing a lawsuit and have placed an additional freeze on the company's accounts. I sat up straighter. The first fall had come faster than I expected. Not because I wanted it to, but because Michael had chosen this path for himself long ago. More loans, expansion, misuse of funds, the belief that money would just make more money. When one link broke, the entire chain collapsed. Does this affect me in any way? I asked. No. Not unless you co-signed or were listed as a joint debtor. Your name does not appear on any of the current documents. I sighed in relief. I wanted no part of any remaining entanglements. At lunchtime, I got a short text from Frank. Michael is holed up in his office. He looks pale. The employees gathered to ask for their paychecks, but he said there's no money. I read the message and called Frank back. Post a notice of temporary closure for now. I will provide any necessary documentation to support unemployment claims or job searches. You can also write letters of recommendation for anyone who needs one. Please make sure they are not hurt by this. Frank's voice was thick with emotion. Yes. Thank you. In the afternoon, my phone rang with another unfamiliar number. A young, slightly arrogant female voice. Grace. This is Jessica. I was silent for a moment. So, she finally appears. Jessica continued, her tone accusatory. Don't you think you're going too far? Michael is having a really hard time. And if you take all the assets, what's left for him? Why are you calling me? I asked directly. Jessica took a breath, then spoke as if she were laying out terms. Could you unfreeze the account? Michael promised he would compensate me later. And we're supposed to get married soon. We need to get a house and buy rings. What you're doing is hurting us. I burst out laughing. Not from joy, but at the sheer unadulterated audacity. I spoke each word clearly. You're only 19. But you talk like someone who's very used to living off other people's money. Whether Michael can take care of you or not is not my responsibility. Jessica was furious. You're so selfish. Selfish, I replied, is just an accusation people hurl at someone they can no longer use. I hung up. I sat still for a moment, looking out the window. The sky over Chicago was a brilliant blue. I knew that starting today, Michael would begin his fall. And that fall would drag down everyone who had once laughed at me. To all of you listening to this story, I ask for your support one last time. Please like and subscribe. And I wish you all health and peace. That night, I received a short text from Michael. Grace, I was wrong. I looked at the words, but my heart didn't stir. Wrong or not, it was too late. A person cannot undo a life they have personally destroyed with a single apology. 2 days later, while I was at my new facility reorganizing the machine inventory and planning the installation, I got a message from Mr. Chen. Mr. Davis is on his way to the bank. I read it, didn't ask any more questions, and put my phone down. I knew that a cornered person's first instinct is to run to where they think the money is. And the bank was the place that always made him believe salvation was just a button press away. About 10 minutes later, a call came from Frank. His voice was subdued. Miss Miller, Michael went to the bank near the factory. He was saying he needed to pay the suppliers, but it seems he couldn't make a withdrawal. Did you see for certain? I asked quietly. I heard him yelling on the phone. He was saying his transactions were restricted and that he'd received a freeze notification. I replied with a quiet "I see." But it felt like a sound coming from far away. It was the final link in a chain of actions. I wasn't happy. I just felt it was the natural outcome. At the same time, my phone started ringing incessantly. It was Michael. I stared at it for a moment, then answered. I wanted to hear what his voice would sound like. Grace, he shouted the moment I picked up. What did you do to my accounts? I went to the bank and they said my cards are restricted. I can't pull out a single dollar. His voice was ragged, like someone shouting while running. I was calm. I told you to check. I did check. And now Michael gritted his teeth. Do you know there are people standing outside the factory demanding money? They are about to call the police. Do you want to see me humiliated in the middle of the industrial park? I didn't beat around the bush. I asked him directly. When you threw those divorce papers in my face, did you think about how I would be humiliated? Michael was momentarily speechless. Then he growled. That's different. It's not different. I replied. The only difference is that this time you're the one who's cornered. I could hear his heavy breathing on the other end of the line. Then his voice changed to a pleading tone he had rarely used with me. Grace, I'm begging you. Just let me withdraw a little. Let me pay these people and then we can renegotiate. I'll sign whatever you want. I'll compensate you. I looked at the thick files on my desk and said slowly, Michael, you've already signed everything. Michael sounded like he'd been doused with cold water. What did I sign? I went straight for the heart of the matter. You signed my divorce agreement. You signed the machine verification forms. You signed the inventory documents and you signed the paperwork related to the commingled business funds which you didn't bother to read. Michael shouted, What are you talking about? My voice didn't rise, but my words were as clear as a final stamp. At the county clerk's office. You were on the phone while you were signing. You probably thought it was just standard procedure. But in that stack was a confirmation that you would return the operating funds you had used from the joint account to cover shortfalls funds that originated from my separate property. The bank has your digital signature on file. I heard complete silence on the other end of the line. So quiet I could hear the ambient noise around him. People talking. The swish of the bank's glass door. Michael stammered. No. That can't be right. I didn't sign anything like that. You did sign it, I said. And at the time, the only thing on your mind was Jessica. I heard a small click as if someone had snatched the phone from his ear. Then Michael's voice came through again, not shouting this time, but crumbling. Grace, you tricked me. I let out a long sigh. I didn't trick you. I gave you the documents. And you signed them yourself. What tricked you was your own carelessness. Michael let out a dry, strange laugh. I was just in a hurry. I cut him off to go ring shopping. Michael said nothing more. I ended the call. I knew that right now at the bank, he was standing in the middle of a truth he could not distort. His own signature was the hammer he had brought down on his own hand. That afternoon, Mr. Chen sent an update. The $500,000 loan under Michael's sole proprietorship had officially defaulted. The bank was initiating a lawsuit and preparing to file for asset seizure. I read it, but my heart was steady. I had cut all ties in advance. I had never co-signed, never been a joint debtor. I had once advised Michael against taking out risky additional loans. But he had laughed and said, What do you know? You just stay at home. Frank sent another message. The employees have gathered outside the office asking for their paychecks. Michael is hiding in his room and won't come out. I read the message and called Frank back. For those in the most difficult situations, please send me a list. I will provide a small amount of assistance to each of them to help them get by. Consider it my thanks for their hard work over the years. But make it clear, this assistance is a personal gesture, not a legal obligation. Don't let anyone take advantage of this. Frank was silent for a moment. Then his voice was thick with emotion. Yes. You are a person of integrity. He didn't deserve you. I didn't reply, afraid that if I did, my own emotions would spill over. That night, I received a long text from Michael. For the first time, there were no capital letters, no curses. Grace, I was so wrong. I never thought you would go this far. I'm bankrounded by creditors, and the bank has frozen my accounts. I can't even get the few thousand of my personal money that's left. Jessica is furious and I don't know what to do. Can we please meet just once? I read it and put my phone down. I didn't reply immediately. I went out onto the balcony and looked at the city's nightscape. The lights were like a network of veins. I suddenly remembered my wedding day with Michael. I had believed I was choosing a strong-willed man. But will without morals is just ambition. An unchecked ambition eventually burns its owner. After a moment, I texted back a single sentence. Take responsibility for what you signed and what you did. That was it. I knew it would hurt him. But sometimes pain is the only thing that can make a person wake up. Late that night, a call came from Mr. Chen. Miss Miller, there's a possibility Mr. Davis will file a counter-suit claiming bankruptcy of the factory. I replied immediately. Prepare all the evidence. Source of capital. Premarital assets. Inventory documents. Signatures. We have more than enough. Don't worry, Mr. Chen said. I hung up, sat down, and opened the file for my new factory plan. The screen showed only clear, cold numbers. But for the first time, in my mind, those numbers held the meaning of freedom. 3 days after the phone call from the bank, everything moved faster than I had imagined. As fast as a person on the edge of a cliff falling to the bottom with just a gentle push from reality. That morning, while I was in a meeting with the technical team at my new facility, I got a call from Frank. His voice was as if he'd been up all night. Miss Miller, Michael has been hospitalized. I stopped my pen. Why? He collapsed. Last night, the creditors went to his parents' house. He rushed over. They got into a huge argument and he passed out. I was silent for a moment, not out of sympathy, but out of an understanding that the human body has its limits. When the mind breaks, the body speaks for it. What's his condition? The doctors are saying it's exhaustion and low blood pressure. It's not life-threatening. I nodded, though Frank couldn't see me. Thank you for letting me know. I hung up and turned back to the meeting table. The engineers were still waiting. I continued as if nothing had happened. Not because I was heartless, but because I had learned that sympathy should not be allowed to halt my own life. At lunchtime, I received a call from a familiar number. It was Robert. His voice had lost its usual booming patriarchal authority. It was just the voice of an old man. Grace, can you hear me? Yes, Mr. Davis. I can hear you. I replied politely. He sighed, a sound like gravel scraping his throat. Michael is in the hospital. Can you come visit him? I looked out the window. The sun was still bright. The sky still blue. Mr. Davis, Michael and I have finalized our divorce proceedings. I no longer have the right to do that. Robert couldn't finish his sentence. But he was your husband once. I didn't raise my voice. And he was also the man who, along with you, signed off on the papers to throw me out of my home. He was silent. In the background, I could hear Carol's voice, sharp and full of resentment. It's all your fault he ended up like this. Are you happy now? I closed my eyes, then opened them. Mrs. Davis, if you think I have the power to control Michael's fate, you overestimate me. I merely reacted to his actions. Carol burst into tears. The sound of anger and frustration. You're a wicked, wicked woman. I didn't argue. I just said slowly and clearly, I'm not wicked. I just refuse to be the one who loses anymore. I hung up. That afternoon, Mr. Chen informed me that the bank had filed a formal lawsuit to recover the loan, and several suppliers had also begun to file their own suits. The name Michael Davis was all over the documents. I had been prepared for this day since I signed the divorce papers, so I read through each line without trembling. In the evening, I got a text from Jessica. Not her old, arrogant tone, but short, fragmented sentences. Grace, I'm sorry. I looked at the screen and didn't reply right away. A moment later, another message came. Michael said you were the one who blocked the money. I didn't know it was this serious. I typed slowly. What you don't know is often what you don't want to know. Jessica replied almost instantly. I've moved my things to a friend's house. I can't handle the creditors calling all the time. I read it unsurprised. You're still young. You'll get used to passing the consequences of your decisions on to others. Jessica went silent. The conversation ended there. That night, I sat alone in my new apartment. The space was still empty. No pictures on the walls. Not much furniture. But I liked the emptiness. It felt like a blank page no one else had written on. I thought of Michael lying in a hospital bed. I felt no triumph and I would not go back. Some paths once diverged cannot be rejoined. Trying to lift up the one who has fallen would only risk being pulled down with them. 2 days later I heard Michael had been discharged. He didn't go back to the factory or his old house, but went straight to his parents. The creditors still showed up. The bank still sent notices and the employees scattered to find new jobs. Davis Precision officially closed its doors. Frank came to see me. We sat in the same small cafe where he used to pick me up for factory meetings. "Miss Miller, I'm resigning." I looked at him. "Have you found a new position?" "Yes. A friend recommended me. I want to start over." I nodded. "Go. If you need a letter of recommendation, I will write one for you." Frank looked at me, his expression earnest. "Thank you for not abandoning us." I looked at him and said, "Honestly, you and the employees never betrayed me. Frank, I have no reason to abandon you." We parted ways. I felt another chapter close. A few days later, Mr. Chen reported that Michael was preparing to sue me for damages to his business activities. I heard the news and said only one word. "Okay. Prepare our defense." "Yes. But Miss Miller, are you not afraid of public opinion? People tend to sympathize with the one who has fallen." I scoffed. "Public opinion won't live my life for me." That evening, I ran into an old acquaintance. She saw me and immediately asked, "I heard your ex-husband went bankrupt. Don't you feel sorry for him?" I didn't evade the question. "I do feel sorry, but feeling sorry isn't a reason to sacrifice myself again." She fell silent, then nodded. I went home, opened my laptop, and looked at the business plan for my new factory. The machinery was ready, staff were being hired, and a trial production order had come in. I placed my hands on the keyboard. My heart beat steadily. I was neither excited nor afraid. That night, I received one last text from Michael. "Grace, if I could go back to the beginning, I wouldn't have made that choice." I stared at the words for a long time, then deleted the message without replying. Some what-ifs are born too late, and life has no undo button. There is only the path forward. The news that Michael was preparing to sue me was no longer a rumor. One morning, Mr. Chen sent me a copy of the officially filed complaint. Michael claimed that I had arbitrarily transferred assets, severely impacting his business operations, and was seeking damages. I read it all, put down my phone, took a sip of bitter coffee, and felt nothing. "What's your assessment?" I asked Mr. Chen, my voice calm. "This lawsuit is primarily designed to pressure you into a settlement," he replied concisely. "However, our case is rock solid. You are not a co-owner of the assets you recovered, and you acted in accordance with an agreement signed by Mr. Davis himself." I nodded. "Then, let's see it through to the end." On the first day of mediation, I arrived on time. The room was cold from the air conditioning with a long table and chairs lined up. When I entered, Michael was already seated. He was noticeably thinner, his eyes sunken, his jawline sharp, but more unsettling than his appearance was the look in his eyes. A mixture of anger, helplessness, and a desperate attempt to cling to his last shred of pride. A man in a dark suit sat next to him, his lawyer. I realized Michael was still trying to project the image that he could fight back. He saw me and said in a hoarse voice, "You came?" I nodded and pulled out a chair on the opposite side. I received the notice. The mediator began with procedural remarks. I listened without interrupting. When it was time for each side to present their case, Michael's lawyer immediately launched into a lengthy, eloquent explanation of how I had paralyzed the factory, causing Michael to lose his ability to pay his debts and suffer severe damages. When it was my turn, I opened my briefcase and laid out the documents one by one. "This is the proof of purchase for the CNC machines and inspection equipment bought before the marriage. This is the land lease agreement in my name with the deposit and rent paid from my personal account. This is the wire transfer confirmation for the initial $1.5 million investment. This is the divorce agreement signed by Mr. Davis in which he agrees to my recovery of separate property. And this is the inventory checklist signed by Mr. Davis, his parents, and the inventory team. I spoke in short, emotionless sentences. The mediator's expression grew more solemn as he flipped through the pages. Mr. Chen added, "My client did not ask for any marital profits, nor did she request a division of assets acquired during the marriage. Recovering her separate property is her legal right. The fact that the factos operations became dependent on those assets was a management decision made by Mr. Davis, and the responsibility for that cannot be shifted to the legal owner." Michael slammed his hand on the table. "But you knew the factory would fail if you took the machines. You did it on purpose." I looked at him for a moment. I saw the man who had sat on the sofa coldly telling me to just sign as he threw the divorce papers at me. I wasn't angry. I was just tired. I didn't intentionally try to kill the factory. I just refused to let you use my property to build your new life. Michael's eyes turned red. "Did you hate me that much?" I shook my head. It wasn't hate. It was waking up. The mediator asked directly, "Mr. Davis, are you willing to withdraw the complaint and end this dispute?" Michael was at a loss for words. He looked at his lawyer, then back at me. I could see the final calculation in his eyes. If I gave him even a little, he would have breathing room. "Grace, if you give me some money, I'll drop the suit. I'll never bother you again." I answered instantly, without hesitation, "No." The single word was like a nail hammered into wood. Michael froze. "You really want to see me on the street?" I looked at him. "You're alive, Michael. You're just paying the price." The room fell silent. Michael's lawyer tried to change his tune, suggesting a humanitarian settlement. But I knew that offering humanitarian aid to the person who had tried to throw me out with nothing was like throwing myself back into the same old trap. The mediation failed. The mediator concluded that the case would proceed to the next stage. I stood up, gathered my documents, and prepared to leave. Michael called out my name, his voice cracking. "Grace, don't you have any feelings left at all?" I turned back. This time, I spoke slowly, as if to myself. "My feelings died the night you stood in front of your parents, showed them Jessica's picture, and called me useless. My feelings died when you tried to throw me out with nothing. Don't ask me why I'm cold." Michael slumped back into his chair, his shoulders sagging. In that moment, I saw that he was no longer my enemy, but just a man who had lost everything. Seeing himself in a shattered mirror, I walked out into the hallway. The midday sun beat down on the hot pavement. I stood for a moment, took a deep breath, and sent a text to Mr. Chen. "Proceed as planned. No compromises." In the afternoon, I returned to my new facility. The technical team reported that the machine trials had gone smoothly and the prototypes had passed inspection. A small order from one of my father's old partners had just been confirmed. Looking at the contract, I felt a warmth spread through my chest. I hadn't defeated anyone. I had simply become the master of my own life. That night, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. It was Robert. His voice was weak. "Grace, please stop this. He has nothing left." I paused for a moment, then said quietly, "Mr. Davis, I am not pressuring him. I just can't die with him in order to save him." Robert couldn't speak and hung up. I put down the phone. Outside, the city lights were coming on. I made a promise to myself. Some final confrontations are necessary, not to win, but to cut ties, to make a path for yourself to live. After the mediation failed, everything moved to a stage where only evidence mattered. I no longer had to listen to accusations or explain myself to anyone. The only thing I did was go to work, sign contracts, and build my new factory, tending to every detail as if I were tending to my own life again. But just when I thought the storm had passed, another attack came from a completely unexpected quarter. Jessica. That afternoon, as I was leaving my facility, I received a text from an unknown number. The message was concise. "Grace, I want to meet. It's Jessica." Attached was the address of a bubble tea shop in a trendy part of town. I stared at the screen for a moment. I didn't want to meet. I had said enough, done enough, and been silent enough. But then it occurred to me that sometimes people seek you out not to apologize, but to open the door to new problems. I decided to go. Not out of curiosity, but because I wanted to face the problem head on. The shop was filled with the sweet smell of bubble tea and loud music. Jessica was sitting in a corner. She was dressed neatly and her makeup was impeccable. But her eyes were tired. When she saw me, she stood up and gave an awkward smile. "You actually came." I sat down and got straight to the point. "What is it?" Jessica bit her lip, her hands clutching her cup. "It's so hard because of Michael." I looked her straight in the eye. "Is Michael making it hard for you? Or was it you who jumped into his life because of what you thought was his money?" Jessica fell silent, blinking rapidly, as if trying to hold back tears. "I didn't know he had so much debt. He said the factory was doing well. And he said, he said, you were just someone who stayed at home and didn't know anything." I believed him. I scoffed. "You believed him because you wanted to believe him to justify getting involved in someone else's marriage." Jessica lowered her head. After a moment, she looked up, her voice dropping. "Grace, I'm sorry, but I'm in a really tough spot right now. The creditors are calling me. Michael gave me a credit card, saying it was his personal money, but now he wants it back. And the card has been frozen. He says he doesn't know what he'll do if he can't get that money." I looked at Jessica. I could see she was scared. Not for Michael, but for herself. Afraid of being dragged down with him. "When was that card issued?" I asked calmly. Jessica answered quickly as if she had prepared for it. "About 2 years into your marriage. He said it was money he had saved up." I nodded slightly as I suspected. It was the slush fund Michael had siphoned off from my accounts years ago, telling me it was for a short-term investment. Jessica looked at me, her voice pleading. "Can't you unfreeze that card? I'll just take that money, give some to Michael, and then I'll leave. I don't want to be involved anymore." I tilted my head. "And you think I have the authority to unfreeze Michael's credit card?" Jessica said hurriedly. "Michael said you can. He said you just have to call your lawyer and withdraw the freeze request. Please just do it. Think of it as letting him go." I placed my hands on the table, lightly tapping the wooden surface with my fingers. "Jessica, listen carefully. That card was restricted because the funds used to open the account are linked to my separate property. I didn't freeze it for revenge. I did it to prevent the illegal transfer of assets." Jessica's eyes turned red. "But I didn't know." "Not knowing doesn't make you innocent," I replied. Jessica bit her lip, her voice suddenly sharp like a cornered animal. "If you do this, you're backing Michael into a corner. If something happens to him, can you live with that?" I looked her straight in the eye. My voice was cold, but held no malice. "Don't use another person's life to threaten me. The people who backed Michael into a corner are himself and people like you." Jessica trembled. She was silent for a long time. Then her voice dropped as if the words were falling from her lips. "I'm pregnant." The words were like a stone dropped into a still pond. I showed no change in expression as I asked, "Are you sure?" Jessica nodded, tears finally streaming down her face. "I found out recently. I haven't told anyone yet. When I told Michael, he said he can't be responsible right now. He told me to handle it myself." As I listened, a corner of my heart HDHD, not for Jessica, but for the child, thrown into a chaotic mess created by adults before it was even born. Jessica cried, her voice cracking. "Grace, please, I'm not asking you to release Michael. Just give me a way out. A way to survive." I looked at her. I remembered her arrogant voice on the phone telling me, "We're getting married soon. Don't interfere." I remembered her dismissive attitude. But I also saw a 1-year-old girl in a state of panic, realizing for the first time in her life that money is not a talisman, and a love based on it collapses faster than anything else. I spoke slowly and clearly. "I will not unfreeze the card, and I will not withdraw the restriction request. However, I will have my lawyer send you a list of medical support resources, places where you can get checkups, counseling, and legal help if you need protection. You have to take responsibility for your choices. But the child is innocent." Jessica looked up, tears clinging to her eyelashes. "That's it. I nodded. Yes. I won't raise your life for you. I will only show you how to save yourself. Jessica burst into tears, crying harder. This time I didn't offer gentle words of comfort. I just let her cry. Sometimes you have to cry to wash the illusions from your eyes. I stood up and placed some money on the table. Before I left, I added one more thing. Jessica, remember this. When you get involved in someone else's marriage, you might think you've won, but in reality, you've just stepped into a pit called greed. And that pit is so deep. You have to dig your own way out with your own hands. I turned my back and left the shop. Outside, it had suddenly started to rain. Heavy, thick drops hit the hot asphalt. I stood under the eaves, watching the rain, and felt a sense of lightness. I hadn't taken revenge on Jessica, nor had I saved her in a way that would allow her to keep leaning on others. I had simply broken a cycle. The cycle of a woman having to sacrifice herself for the comfort of others. That night, I sent a message to Mr. Chen. If Jessica contacts you, please send her the legal and medical support information. The assets remain as they are. Mr. Chen replied. Yes. Understood. I knew that after this meeting, Michael would be in even more disarray. What he thought was his escape route had become a new burden. And the people who had hovered around him for his money would turn their backs on him faster than the wind. The date for the first court hearing came sooner than I expected. It wasn't dramatic like in the movies. Just a hot morning. An old courthouse hallway that smelled of old paper and people walking by quietly. I arrived early, sat on a wooden bench, and placed my briefcase neatly beside me. I didn't pray. And I didn't worry. I had done what I had to do. And the rest was up to the law. Michael arrived late. When he walked in, I saw a completely different person from the one I had known months ago. His shirt was loose, his collar wrinkled, and his eyes were sunken. He looked around and his gaze landed on me. There was no hatred, no pleading, just a long, deep exhaustion. His lawyer whispered something in his ear. Michael nodded, but he seemed distracted, as if he hadn't slept at all. When the judge called the case, I stood up, my back straight. Mr. Chen stood beside me, calmly arranging his documents. On the other side, Michael's lawyer began his presentation, repeating the familiar arguments that I had paralyzed the business by recovering assets and had caused him damages. I listened without interrupting. I knew that speaking more wouldn't change the truth. When it was our turn, Mr. Chen explained everything logically. One point at a time. He didn't attack anyone personally. He just laid the evidence on the table. The premarital capital, the machinery receipts, the land lease, the signed divorce agreement, the inventory documents, the bank records. It all formed an undeniable straight line. The judge asked me a few short questions. Did you recover any marital profits? No. Did you sue for damages? No. On what grounds did you recover the assets? On the grounds of my premarital separate property and the signed agreement. Michael stood up and said in a hoarse voice. But she knew the factory would fail if she took the machines. The judge looked at him. Is there any evidence that Miss Miller had an obligation to continue providing her separate property for your business operations after the divorce? Michael was silent. In that moment, I understood that all emotion no longer had a place. Only the law and signatures remained. The trial was over faster than I had expected. The judge dismissed Michael's claim and affirmed my right to recover my separate property. The ruling also stated that I was not liable for any damages incurred by the business operations Michael had managed. There was no uproar, no applause, just the dry sound of the gavel. As I walked out of the courtroom, Michael called my name. Grace. I stopped. What is it? He swallowed hard. I lost. I nodded. Yes. Michael gave a sad smile. Can you lend me some money? I promise I'll pay you back. I looked at him for a long time. The man who was once my husband. The man I had given my trust to. The man who had ruined everything with his carelessness. I said slowly. No. Michael closed his eyes, his shoulders slumping. So, you're just going to live like you don't know me from now on. We no longer have any reason to know each other. I replied. I turned away. This time, I wasn't carrying a heavy burden. There was just a door. Finally and firmly closed. In the afternoon, I returned to my new factory. The sound of machines running. The smell of fresh oil. The bright lights. The technical team reported that the trial production run had passed quality standards, and our partner had confirmed a formal order. As I signed the contract, the tip of my pen felt solid. I was no longer proving anything to anyone. I was just doing my job. In the evening, I got a short text from Jessica. "I've decided to have the baby. I'll figure it out on my own." I read it and replied with a single sentence. "I hope you are strong enough." I added nothing more. That night I stood on my balcony. The wind was cool. I thought about the past few months. About my naivety. About the trust one had misplaced. But I didn't regret it. If it weren't for those cracks, I would never have learned how to stand on my own. The next day, I received a notification from Mr. Chen that all legal proceedings were complete. I put the documents in a drawer and locked it. I didn't need to look at them anymore. Those papers had served their purpose. I opened my laptop and wrote a 3-year plan. Not too ambitious. Just enough to stand firm. I added one more line. Never mix separate property with emotion. I smiled. Life doesn't always reward the kind, but it always rewards those who know how to set boundaries. I had paid a high price, but I had learned a lesson worth every penny. A month after the trial, I stood in front of my new factory, looking at the new sign. Still smelling of fresh paint. The sun over Chicago was gentle that day, and the wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of hot metal and the rhythmic sound of machines. I had been familiar with that sound since I was a child. I could tell just from the vibrations if a machine was running well or if trouble was coming. And now I was hearing that sound again in a space I had built myself. Michael's old factory was shut down. People said the main gate was sealed with a for-lease sign hanging crookedly. I never went to see it. I didn't want to view his downfall as my victory. I just wanted to move forward. I was tired of the years I had spent trying to prove I was worthy of someone else's respect. Now I wanted to live a life based on my own value. Mr. Chen informed me that Michael had not appealed the verdict. He had probably realized that dragging it out would only waste more money and cost him more dignity. Or maybe he just didn't have the strength left. A few acquaintances mentioned he was working as a delivery driver sometimes late into the night. I felt neither happy nor sad hearing this. I just thought that in a way life is fair. You reap what you sow. Jessica had returned to her hometown somewhere in the Midwest. She texted me one more time to say she had found a job as a sales assistant for an online boutique and was going to regular prenatal checkups. I didn't ask any more questions. Just sent one last piece of advice. Get strong. Never put your life in someone else's hands again. I didn't think of it as forgiving what she had done, but as advice for a human being who was still so young. If she didn't wake up, the cycle of pain would repeat itself forever. And so every morning I went to my factory early. I walked through the warehouse, checked the products, reviewed the production schedule, and asked each team how they were doing. Sometimes I would stand in front of the line of CNC machines for a long time, lightly touching the cold steel surface, feeling as if I were touching my own will. The things I was once dismissed for my caution, my diligence, my patience, were now the very foundation I stood on. One afternoon, after the employees had gone home, I stayed in my office and looked at the first contract for my new factory. I thought back to the night Michael had thrown the divorce papers on the table. His contemptuous gaze, his commanding voice. I hadn't cried then, not because I wasn't in pain, but because I knew that if I cried, they would see me as weak. And once they thought I was weak, they would take even more from me. I was once the woman who poured her entire inheritance into her husband's dream. I thought that was love. But a love carried by only one person eventually becomes a noose. What I did was not revenge. I simply untied the noose from around my own neck. I am not telling this story to brag about my victory or to make you hate a man or a young woman. I am telling it to remind all of us that kindness must come with boundaries. Love must come with respect. And trust must come with proof. If you are in a relationship where you are always the one sacrificing, always apologizing, always losing, Stop for a moment and ask yourself, are you loving or are you being used? If you are ever signing a document, whether with a spouse, a friend, or a partner, read it carefully. A signature is a responsibility. Never entrust your signature to a fleeting emotion. Don't rush or try to please someone at the cost of digging yourself into a deep hole. If you have separate property, do not mix it with promises. Promises can change, but documents and transaction records do not. And if you have already mixed them, learn how to recover what is yours, and learn how to protect yourself with at least a basic knowledge of the law. And most importantly, do not be afraid to start over. I lost my marriage, but I found myself. I no longer live for conditional love. I live to be respected most of all by myself. My story of reclaiming my assets after a divorce and starting over from scratch is a powerful message about the strength of a modern woman. One who knows how to love but not lose herself. Who knows how to sacrifice but not be used, and who even after failure knows how to stand up and build a stronger life. If you are facing a crisis in your marriage, a dispute over assets, or need the courage to start your life anew, remember, boundaries are self-respect. Knowing the law is self-protection, and it is never too late to begin again. Finally, to all of you who have listened to this story, I ask for your support one last time. Please like and subscribe. I wish all of you health and peace. I closed my laptop and looked out the window. The street lights reflected off the resting machines, sparkling like a quiet promise. I knew my life would still have its challenges and storms, but I was no longer afraid because I now knew how to stand firm. And once a woman knows how to stand firm, no one can ever pull her down.